So today we're looking at the specifics about virtues and vices in Aristotle's Ethics. And the reason we want to do this is it's nice to know these sort of general things about virtue and vice. But, you know, if you're going to think about things in terms of virtue ethics, you have to be a bit more specific. You have to think, does this person have this virtue or this vice, and then what actually constitutes this virtue and this vice? And you notice Aristotle, we can list all the virtues and vices he talks about from about halfway through Book 3 all the way through Book 5. Book 5 is devoted almost exclusively to one virtue, which is justice. Well, actually one virtue and one vice, injustice, right? And the reason that he does that is because virtue and vice are, or not virtue and vice, justice and injustice are in a certain way more complicated than the other virtues and vices. And justice, like he says, in a certain way is the whole of virtue. So you could think of being just as exercising these virtues not just with respect to yourself or, you know, your family or your immediate surroundings, but with respect to your society, you know. So to be courageous when your society tells you that you need to be courageous, like maybe say on the battlefield, that is also, that's not just courage, that's also in a certain way justice, if you're doing what your community requires of you, right? So justice is a bit more complicated. We'll talk about, I'm going to actually put that one off till the end of class, because we want to look at these other virtues that I think are easier to wrap our heads around. But this is the listing. So there's 11 different virtuous states that are, you know, genuine virtues for Aristotle that we can look at and go into detail. Each of them has some vices opposed to them. So, you know, if we look at this, you're all familiar with this schema now. You know, virtue is in the middle, vice is at the extremes. There's vices of too much, not enough, then the Goldilocks solution just right. And it's not just a matter of amount or degree, it's a matter of all these other things, with the right person, at the right time, in the right way, for the right reasons. And I've given you some sort of charts to help you make sense of that. I'm still developing some of those. I'll be posting those in iLearn for you, hopefully all of them this weekend. But I do already have 3 of them, one for Temperance, one for Liberality, and one for Magnificence. So if you've looked at them, you realize that Aristotle's ideas are not just, you know, finding the middle position. It's finding the middle position in the right way, at the right time. All these sort of qualifications come in. One other thing I want to remind you of, so virtue is the thing to aim for, vice is the thing to avoid. Does that mean all of you are either virtuous or vicious? Why not? I mean, doing virtuous actions makes you virtuous. Doing vicious actions makes you vicious. You've been doing actions your whole life. Why aren't you all virtuous and vicious right now? It's not just that there's like a middle place in between. I mean, there is kind of a continuum here. Remember how Aristotle says you could be doing just actions but not be a just person yet? A lot of that has to do with this for the right reason. I mean, I'm guessing that most of you are pretty law-abiding citizens, right? Marist students tend to be pretty law-abiding. Are you law-abiding because you recognize that that's the right thing to do and you actually desire to do that? Or are you law-abiding because you don't want to get punished? Or is it, you know, sort of a mixture with some things you're doing because you recognize it to be the right thing, other things like observing, you know, something like the speed limit, and we talked about that earlier this semester. Almost none of us actually do observe the speed limits, but we tend to think that 10 over is too much. Are you doing that just because you don't want to get caught? You know, or you don't want people to think you're a bad person? Well, if you're doing it for those reasons, you're not completely just yet. Likewise, you know, if you do bad things, Maybe some of you do bad things, I don't know. I'm guessing that if you do, there are probably more things like having to do with good temper, or maybe courage, or temperance, or liberality, and not so much with justice. But if you do bad things, is it because you're actually a bad person, you're a vicious person? Or are you somebody who could turn out to be a vicious person if they continue on that track, but isn't there yet? Those are distinctions Aristotle can make. Those are distinctions you want to be able to make when you think about people. Look at somebody's characteristic behavior. If they're always over here, there's something wrong with that person. Not just wrong with them psychologically, but wrong with them morally. If they're over here, it's because they want to be over here on some level. They get something out of that. They desire that. If they're over here, not just some of the time, but almost all of the time, they're virtuous. They're where a human being ought to be. They're the ones that you want to look up to and use as reference points. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to look at some of these virtues in detail. We're not going to look at all of them. There are some things too, like Aristotle points out, they're not exactly virtues, but they do have to do with our emotions, and there could be a middle state. Like think about shame, right? All of you felt shame, I think at one point or not. If you haven't, then you're shameless, like Aristotle says, and that's bad. Because a shameless person will do just about anything. Shame is something that helps to let us know, at least in some cases, we're doing the wrong thing, or we're in the wrong condition. Now, it could be over things that are fairly trivial in the big scheme of things, like, you can be shamed, say, on the soccer field, right? You do a stupid play, and they score a goal, or you screw up, somebody setting you up for a goal, and you feel a sense of shame, right? That something didn't go the way it ought to have gone. You may feel a sense of shame sometimes with grading, right? You hand in a paper, you think it's really great, you get it back, it's covered with red ink, and you say, oh, crap. I guess I didn't know this, and I didn't do what I was supposed to do, and I feel stupid, that sort of thing, right? You've all felt something like that. I have myself. It's actually much worse if you're smart. Because if you're smart, you're used to always getting things right, and then when you don't get things right, then you really feel a sense of shame. Now, do some people feel too much shame? More than they ought to? I think you all know people like that. Maybe some of you are like that. That's an extreme. Do some people feel no shame when they ought to feel shame? There's something wrong with that too. There's a right amount to feel. Likewise with pleasure in other people's accomplishments. If it really bothers you that other people are doing well, there's a problem, right? If you really enjoy seeing other people get hurt, that's a problem too. There's sort of a middle position between those. With the rest of these, you can think of them in terms of habits and things that you could reason out. Just for instance, we're not going to talk much about this, but ready wit. This is one I think all of you can relate to very easily. We all, well, not all of us, not necessarily. Somebody could be at the vice of deficiency. But we recognize the value of humor, right? You guys like to laugh? We like to watch comedy shows? Why do we like that? Because it's pleasant, right? Why do we tell jokes to each other? Or, sometimes make up jokes on the spot. Or laugh at each other's stories. That's part of the good life, isn't it? That's part of social life. You may do it on Facebook, you make a little jab at one of your friends, inside joke kind of stuff. Is it possible to put it into this schema, like Aristotle does? Yeah, there's a right amount to enjoy yourself and make fun. It's not like there's just one tiny specified amount, too. It's kind of a range. But can somebody go too far? Do people ever go too far with humor? You ever felt offended? not just because they were making fun of somebody you liked or something, but you thought, this really went too far. This is in poor taste. Yeah? Watch some of those Comedy Central roasts, if you want to get an example of that. They are really vicious. That's an example of humor that's actually gone to the vicious extreme. Can somebody be lacking a sense of humor? Aristotle calls people like that boors, and he calls people like that buffoons. We use other words like, we might call somebody over here a jackass. They're always screwing around. As a matter of fact, there's a whole genre it started as a show, then it became movies called Jackass. And what do those guys do? They're always screwing around and doing things like, shooting each other out of cannons or, riding grocery carts. And it's supposed to be funny, but, is that the right amount? No, it's excessive, right? I'm going to close this up so we don't have a soundtrack. Must be a music appreciation class next to us, Either that or somebody who likes showing a lot of movies. Okay, so let's think about some of these other ones. Let's think about courage, for example. As a matter of fact, can all of you hand your cards up to me? And we'll look at some of these examples.
Do you want to just do 3?
Yeah, well, I want you to do all of these. Well, let me go through the instructions again. So what I want you to do with those note cards that I handed out is I want you to think of, for each of these, I want you to write these down. So you have 9 blanks that you're going to think of. 9 things with 3 categories. So we've got virtues and vices with temperance and self-indulgence and insensibility. So, if you've been reading the Aristotle, if you've been studying this stuff, if you've been using, like for instance, the chart that I actually gave you for this should be a snap. It shouldn't be very hard to do. You should actually know what temperance looks like. Courage, virtue of courage and the vices associated with that, and then magnificence. Remember, it has to do with giving wealth on a large scale. I want you to think of famous people, people that we can use as examples that everybody can relate to, who fit into these molds. So think of somebody who actually you would think is courageous, somebody who you think is a coward, somebody who you think is foolhardy. Down, the bottom one, somebody who's a public figure, who has wealth, who does give the right amount, on a large scale, like some of the people maybe who built your buildings. All your buildings that are named after somebody here on campus, there's a reason they're named after somebody. They gave that money. People who don't give their fair share, and then people who do it, but they do it in such a way as to just draw attention to themselves and to try to make a big name for themselves. So I want you to think about those, and I'm going to use those as examples as we go through this. So let's take one of these then that's not on the list. Let's look at what Aristotle calls liberality. So liberality has to do with giving and taking wealth or property or possession. And I would actually, myself, argue that it could also include time. So if you're, say, volunteering, that could be an example of liberality. Another word that we have for this is generosity. What makes a person generous? It's a matter of giving and taking, right? And I gave you a sort of chart for this that corresponds to what we know from Aristotle's Nichomachean ethics, from that stuff in Book 4. I sort of put it into a table form for you. What's the mean? What's the just right? Well, it has to do with the amount that you give more than the amount that you take. At the extreme of meanness, or we might say being stingy or tight-fisted, or we have all sorts of adjectives for that. The person does not give enough, and they're more interested in taking than giving. At the other extreme, they give too much, or they give in the wrong ways, or at the wrong times, or without thinking about what it is that they're giving for. So we have all three things. We have a mean, a middle position. We have one extreme of deficiency and one extreme of excess. And Aristotle calls that extreme of excess prodigality. That's probably not a term that you relate to very easily. Although you could think of, if you're biblically inclined, you could think of the prodigal son. You know why he's called the prodigal son? The one who goes off and spends all his money in a foreign land and then comes back and he's got nothing, and his dad takes him in and says, "Oh, I'm so glad you're back." And the other son gets kind of mad and says, "I worked for you all this time, and you never gave me anything. Why are you take this deadbeat?" That might be a word we use, a deadbeat. Taking this deadbeat in and giving him all the nice stuff again after he spent your money, literally with whores, and partying. So we don't use the word prodigal, except for in that story of the prodigal son. We use other words. We talk about somebody spending their money too freely, Now, what actually constitutes this mean? So it has to do with giving wealth. The person who's in the right condition, the person who's generous, does that mean they give to everybody? In our society, we might think that. Aristotle would say our society is wrong, that we're not being discriminated against. Because the person who's actually at the mean is discriminating. We often, if I use that word discrimination, we often think that's automatically a bad thing, don't we? I was discriminated against. Now I got grounds for a lawsuit. That's one kind of discrimination. If I discriminate among you students for grades based on your gender, that would be wrong, wouldn't it? Let's say I give all the guys an easy A, and I make all the women work really hard and just give them B's at the top level. That would be wrong to do, wouldn't it? What do you women think about that? Speak up, because it's the only way that keeps things from happening is when you actually stand up for things. What if I did it on the basis of race? That'd be wrong too, right? So we say sexual discrimination is wrong, racial discrimination is wrong. There's other types, we can talk about ageism. All of you are young, so maybe I decide, well, young people don't know anything, so I'm going to give you all C's. How could you possibly know anything? I mean, Aristotle actually said, you just don't start teaching people ethics until they're about 30, because they don't have enough life experience to make sense of it. I actually think he's wrong about that, but some people might not, That would be wrong too. How else aren't you supposed to discriminate?
You're supposed to discriminate against age. You're not supposed to discriminate against someone with a disability or
we don't have
inability.
We call it sexism if it's gender. We call it racism if it's race. I don't know if we have an ism yet for ability or disability. Abilityism? Yeah. Ageism people talk about.
I think they call it ableism.
Do they call it? Okay, ableism. There we go. So that's a bad thing to discriminate about or against. You're not supposed to discriminate against people if they have veteran status or not, believe it or not. You're not supposed to discriminate, at least in public institutions, on religious grounds. Right? Does that mean that you can't discriminate in any ways? That makes it sound like discrimination is a pretty bad thing to do, right? And we're all supposed to be really open-minded and, treat everybody as if, they all deserve a fair shake. Aristotle doesn't say that. Aristotle thinks that if you're a generous person, you don't give to everybody. You give to those who, the giving is actually going to make things better. Maybe you don't give the bum on the corner $5. Maybe that's not actually generosity. If the bum on the corner is actually going to spend it on whatever that's going to buy of liquor, Aristotle would say that's actually not generosity. That's in some way prodigality, giving for the wrong reasons. If you're giving to people just because you feel pity, that's probably not a good reason to give. There's lots of people ready to take your money over pity. You guys have seen the commercials, right? Those are just appeals to pity. Not saying you shouldn't give to people, not saying that you shouldn't be charitable. But Aristotle would suggest some very judiciously applied charity, some discriminating charity. He says, the liberal person gives wealth to others through spending and giving it away to the right amount, to the right people at the right times, for the right things. If you're actually trying to benefit that bum on the corner, which might be okay for you to do, is it better just to hand him $5, or is it better to take him to buy a meal? That might be, if that's going to be generosity, it's going to be discriminating in what it's giving the money for the right reasons. People who are in the mean, they also take wealth for the right reasons. They're less concerned with taking wealth than they are with giving wealth. That's what makes a person generous. If a person is much more concerned with taking than giving, they're at the other extreme. They're stingy. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Let's talk more about prodigality, though. So the prodigal person actually looks more like the generous person. You notice with Aristotle, he says sometimes one of the extremes looks closer to the mean than the other one. It works that way with generosity and prodigality. The prodigal person is the one who's always buying the drinks, who's always throwing the parties, and then has no money left over at the end of the month. And then they're the one hitting you up for money at the end of the month. Can you just make me a loan? When I was in the Army, we had a lot of guys like that. We would, because we'd all get paid once a month, and some guys would drink their money up within like a week. And then, of course, it was a pretty easy life in some respects, because you could go eat in the chow house, so if you ran out of money, you could still eat, and you still had a roof over your head because the Army was giving you barracks, and you still had clothing. So you weren't going to be out on the street. But these guys were living basically like, somebody way beyond their means. And then, pretty soon, they would want you to make them a loan, and they would get very angry if you didn't. But if you did, what was going to happen to the money?
Wouldn't get it back.
Well, you wouldn't get it back. What were they going to do with it?
Spend it.
Yeah, they'd spend it right away. Spending for the wrong reasons, not necessarily even too much on each individual thing, but buying too many individual things, spending on too many occasions for the wrong things, not thinking these sort of things through, not being discriminating in where your money is going. What does that lead to? That leads, the generous person is actually going to manage their money or their property or their resources or their time well. And so they're actually going to have money or time to give to other people when it's needed. The prodigal person seems like they're the kind of person you want to be around, don't they? Party all the time. But they're going to run out pretty quick. And then they're not going to have anything to give. And then actually they may start, looking in the wrong places for more money to give or more resources to give. They may be driven to end up doing the wrong things as a result. You actually don't want to be around these kind of people. You want to be around people who are actually generous, not people who are prodigal. Then Aristotle talks about two different kinds of deficiency. He talks about what he calls the miserly or the stingy, and what's wrong with them. They are more interested in taking than giving, and they just don't give much, right? And they feel a lot of pain. The generous person feels pleasure when they give to people. Actually, so does the prodigal person. They feel pleasure. All of you have done this, right? You've given money to people or your time to people, and it makes you feel good to some extent. If not, you might be miserly. If it really hurts you to give money to a good cause, you're looking at that dollar and you're You're one of the people that it's hard to let go of that dollar. Well, you might be at this extreme then. And that's not good. That's not as bad as the other type of extreme. He also talks about the greedy. And the greedy are those who are willing to, they really desire to have wealth, and they're willing to take it from pretty much anywhere they can get it. They're not interested in giving, they're interested in taking, in accumulating. And he says that these are the people who will ply, as he calls them, sordid trades. You know, when people are involved in criminal enterprises, is it because they just have to feed their family? Or is it because they really want wealth and they're willing to take it from wherever they can get it? They're willing to sacrifice other values, which they often do recognize, for the sake of that one good of wealth. They desire wealth too much. It's easy to sympathize with some people who are that way, right? The kid who ends up becoming the local, what's the name for it? The person who organizes the drug sales. I'm blanking on the name now. It's sort of like one step up in the hierarchy. If everybody around you seems to be greedy, you're probably going to be greedy too. And if you grow up in poverty, it's going to be hard not to value wealth in a way that other people don't. And if you grow up in poverty, you probably also are not getting a good appreciation of the other goods of life. It's being driven home to you over and over again that wealth is important. That's not actually most of the people who end up applying, as Aristotle says, sordid trades, though. They come from all walks of life. He gives examples of, say, pimps, right? We often talk as if pimps are these kind of colorful characters. No, what pimps are people who seduce other people into prostitution, which is, selling your body for money, something that if you want to make money at, you have to do a lot of, with a lot of people that you don't like. And pimps are the people who keep them in line and live off of them, and when they get out of line, beat them or kill them, and often drug them up. That's what you would call a sordid trade. Why does somebody become a pimp? Because they care more about gaining wealth, that's the central value for them, than about anything else. Than about, say, human dignity, or even what other people think. Most people, when you actually look at communities, we have these pimps that are big characters on TV and stuff like that. When you actually go to communities where prostitution is taking place, pimps are not highly regarded people. They are considered to be scum. And there's a good reason. Aristotle would say, yeah, they are the greedy. They are among the greedy. There's a lot of other people who are greedy too. You can do it at a very high level. What's one of the biggest? You guys are all familiar with these big protests going on downtown. The Take Wall Street movement. Nobody's quite sure, what they want or where they're going. But there's one thing that's pretty clear that they're mad about: greed. Now, whether Wall Street people in general are greedy or not, there's certainly a public perception of it, isn't there? That they're basically just interested in making money, and that people's jobs or lives or dignity or any of these other things or holding communities together are of little value to them. If that's really the case, then they would fit into Aristotle's category of the greedy. So, well, have you written something down on your things? Let me collect them then.
Put any names on these?
Nah, I'm just looking for examples. All right. So let's look now at courage. We'll start with courage, because I think that's a virtue that is easier for us to wrap our heads around and relate to. In part because the dramas, the narratives that we like to look at and we like to think about, even if we're not, courageous all that often. And you probably are courageous more often than you think if you widen courage broadly enough. We have a lot of dramas where we see people fighting and things like that. So, virtue of courage. Before I look at these examples, so courage has to do with two things. Besides actions, it has to do with two kinds of emotions. The emotion of fear, so that one we recognize pretty easily. Courage is mastering your fear, we often say. And then the emotion of confidence. And these are sort of opposites to each other, but you can feel them at the same time. Any of you have ever been, let me try to think of some examples. I mean, for me the example is like getting in a fight, and you're feeling that sense of fear, but you're also feeling excited at the same time, and you don't want to get hurt. Getting hit hurts, right? But then it's also kind of a thrill. Can any of you relate to stuff like that? I mean, there's other extreme sports things that are kind of like that. I think if you go snowboarding down a mountain, maybe there's something like that. I'm guessing that, like, football. Where's Mr. Bryant? He's there. When the clash takes place, there's kind of an excitement with that. And you have to overcome that feeling of maybe getting hurt. Same thing for soccer. Soccer is very much a contact sport, at least it was when I played. Basketball is too, right? You set picks, and when people get fouled, often they get hurt. What else is like that? Yeah.
Boxing.
Yeah, boxing is very much, that's all it is the whole time, is punching the other guy, right? But can we think of anything that's not necessarily sports, or, well, think about going into a negotiation. Now, for most of you at this point, what's it going to be? Most likely a car, because you're not buying houses yet, or you're not doing, wheeling and dealing of commodities or anything like that. Some people actually get kind of a thrill about that. Or, here's a great example. How many of you, well, I'll ask a couple of questions. How many of you ever had a fear of public speaking? Almost all of you. Interesting. How many of you still have a fear of public speaking? Oh, actually about half of you. Wow. Do you guys have to take a speech class here at Marist? One of the reasons that a lot of schools make you take a speech class is to help you overcome that fear of public speaking. I think maybe next semester when I teach this class again, I'll incorporate something with the presentations and to help students work their way through that. Now, you get up to talk about something, and let's assume that you're actually prepared. You come in, your note cards aren't out of order. You can feel that sense of fear, but also a sense of confidence because you're prepared, right? Just as much as when you've learned the plays. You feel that sense of anxiousness. Am I going to screw it up? But also, well, I am prepared for this sort of thing. So courage has to do with that. And the courageous person feels both of those emotions, and then they manage them properly. And what does courage have to do with? It has to do with things that are, by their nature, scary. It's right to actually feel fear the first time that you have to speak in public. It's right, actually, to feel fear when you are putting your body on the line and you may get your leg broken, or your collarbone, or, God knows what else. It's right to feel fear. Well, it's right to feel fear when you walk into the boxing ring. If you don't, there's something wrong at that point. And if you don't feel fear at all, you are actually at the vicious extreme. Those are the foolhardy. Those are the rash people. I remember, I'll tell you kind of a funny story. At least it's funny to me. I used to do martial arts. And I was studying karate, and I was working restaurant jobs and stuff like that, because I had no intention of going to college. I was going to go into the Army after I finished high school. And then there was like a delay for the thing I wanted to do, so I was just working these dead-end restaurant jobs and studying karate, working out. So there was an older guy, this is when I was working at Kentucky Fried, and so there was this older guy who transferred over to our store, and by older I mean, now he would have been younger than me. He was probably in his mid to late 20s, and he was kind of a badass, you know. And he said, he found out that I was into martial arts, and he said, I'm into martial arts too. I do Tai Chi and this and that. And I said, well, that's cool. I don't know that. You want to work out together or something like that? He said, yeah, that sounds great. We're gonna start sparring. And then he gave me this address. He said, meet me here at like 10 o'clock. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird. So I looked it up, and he'd given me the address to a bar. So I went up to him and I said, so we're going to work out in a bar? And he said, yeah, what I do is for practice is I go in and I just start fights with guys. And I said, well, you know, that doesn't actually sound like martial arts. That sounds just more like getting in fights with guys. And you know, I was like 18 anyway, so, you know, I'm going to go to a bar where I may not get in the first place, and then just go to start fights with people I don't know. That's what this guy did. That's an example of being foolhardy. This guy had no sense of fear whatsoever. He was literally crazy. He ended up electrocuting himself. We had this big fryer called the 10-3 or 10-4, and it would cook like 20 chickens at a time. Big, deep pressure cooker. And it had a complicated, you know, set of machines inside, and it broke down one day. And this is a big catastrophe when this thing breaks down, because Kentucky Fried really relied on that fryer. And you're not supposed to try to fix it yourself. You're supposed to wait for the engineer to come who actually knows what he's doing. This guy, I wasn't there that day, but it shows you how foolhardy he was. He got inside this fryer and started monkeying around. He didn't pull the electrical cord. He didn't unplug it. And of course he got electrocuted, because that's not, you know, just 110, that's 220. And that will fry you. And he died later on. Not right away, but people who are foolhardy, you may think that they're the ones that you want watching your back, or, you know, defending your country, or, you know, being your firemen or things like that. But you don't actually want people who are foolhardy, because they will actually go out of their way to find dangerous situations to be in. You want somebody who's actually courageous, who feels some fear, but then reacts to it the right way. I notice again, too, people often mix these up, don't they? That's where it'll be interesting to look at yours. Cowards are easy to tell. How do cowards behave? Well, let me ask you this. That's the action. What do cowards feel? They feel too much what?
Fear.
Fear and not enough?
Confidence.
Confidence, right. And so then how do they act? When it's a tough situation and there is something actually scary, what do?
Avoid it.
They avoid it, they let you down, they don't have your back, they break formation, they don't follow through on what they're supposed to do. They're you know, if they're doing public speaking, maybe they feel too much fear, they just totally play them up. And remember, these are habitual things. It's not just somebody who does that once. If you find yourself afraid and you back down once, that doesn't make you a coward yet. It's doing that repeatedly. But if you do that over and over and over again, then you will become a coward. And you won't be able to stand up to things that are, you know, actually scary but need to be stood up to. Let's look at some of your examples. So one for courage, Martin Luther King. Good example. Martin Luther King, I don't know if you guys know this, the marchers, the protesters back then, they actually had to go through a training program that these black churches, like the one that Martin Luther King was pastor of, would run. And one of the things that they would do to prepare for what they knew was coming, because back then it wasn't, you know, getting sprayed with pepper spray or something like that. It was fire hoses with water pressure that would tear your skin off, dogs who would you know, bite the living hell out of you, and cops who would break your heads with sticks. And also, you know, other protesters would throw bricks at you and things like that. What they did was they would actually have you go through something like a gauntlet. If you were going to be a protester, there'd be other protesters in your group, and they would yell all sorts of terrible things at you and push you around and stuff like that. And if you couldn't take that, they wouldn't let you go out there and protest. Because they wanted people who had real courage. And the way that you develop courage is by acting courageous. So if you were going through that gauntlet and you broke down, you wouldn't be any good to them. They needed people who were really courageous. They really didn't want people who were foolhardy, did they? Because what would that do? That would get the dogs sent on you. And you couldn't deal with people who were cowards. So that's a good example. Here we've got 3. So Lance Armstrong as being the courageous person. Tosh Point 0, I don't know who that is. As foolhardiness. And Tiger Woods as a coward. That's kind of interesting. I can understand the Lance Armstrong one. Fighting cancer, going out and doing things. How is Tiger Woods a coward? Does anybody see how that would fit in here? Tiger Woods? Maybe not. I mean, some of these are going to be hit and miss. So let's check out some of these other ones. Oh, this is good. So courage, Simba from The Lion King, right? Cowardice, Chucky from Rugrats. I don't know that cartoon. My kids didn't watch that one, but I'm assuming that's some character who's always like giving in. Steve-O from Jackass as foolhardy. Yeah, some of those guys on that show Jackass, the things that they do, they don't have a sense of fear, and they ought to. There was actually another show like that I used to like to watch called Rad Girls. It had these 3 girls that were doing similar stunts, and some of the things that they did were pretty nuts. Let's see, who else? Oh, this is good. For courage, the pilot who landed in the Hudson River. You guys remember that was a while back. That does take courage, doesn't it? And a lot of people probably would have frozen up and crashed the plane. So that's a case where one person's courage ends up being instrumental in saving other lives. Plaxico, as foolhardy, I guess, yeah. That would make sense. Bin Laden as a coward. That might work. Why would Bin Laden be a coward if he's, well, he's not a coward anymore. Well, maybe he is. Depends on where he ended up. Or, yeah.
But when it comes to Bin Laden, we gotta think that for us, he's a coward, but like for his people, his followers,
they think of him as courageous.
Yeah.
As standing up to the great tyrant of the USA and all that sort of stuff. Maybe there's something to. I suspect that when it comes down to it, Bin Laden really wasn't a coward, because it takes something to be able to see through something like that. You might say, well, because he was on the sidelines, he was directing things from behind, he wasn't actually flying the planes himself or something like that. I don't know. Let's see here about another one. Okay. Soldier who recently received the Medal of Honor, usually you get it for courage, right? They don't give it to you because you fold your clothes nice or anything like that. Steve Irwin. Oh, for foolhardiness. Remember the crocodile hunter? I think that makes sense. He got killed with a sort of freak accident. And what was really surprising about that was not that particular freak accident, but that he hadn't been killed before that, wasn't it? He'd gone through all these crazy things, and none of them had killed him. And then he got hit by that 1 in a million chance of the stingray piercing his chest. So these are good examples. I'll use some more of these. Let's look at some of these other virtues and vices now. So we've talked about courage. We've talked about liberality. Let's think about temperance. Or another word for it is moderation, or self-control. So what is that with respect to? That's with respect to certain pleasures, certain bodily pleasures. Aristotle actually is very restrictive about what he counts with that. We would say, food, drink, pleasures of sex. There's other pleasures of the senses that you have, listening to music, watching TV. I suppose that for some people, dancing or doing athletics, working out could be a matter of temperance, because all of these things can be, if you work out, it is painful, right? Some of the working out, but it's also pleasurable after a while. That's why people get hooked on it. There's a right amount at the right time for the right reasons. There's too much, and then there's not enough. Now, do you know a lot of people who enjoy pleasures too little? No? Well, there are some, right? There are some people who take less pleasure in things than they ought to, physical things. Could be because there's something wrong with their body, maybe. There's a chef over at the culinary who had cancer. I forget whether it was cancer of the throat or the tongue or something like that, and he lost his sense of taste. Imagine that, a chef without a sense of taste. That would be sort of like being a great musician and losing your sense of hearing, which did happen, didn't it? Beethoven, who continued to write symphonies after he was deaf, because he had that great of a mastery of his subject. This guy is actually still cooking and teaching classes, because he knows the way things ought to taste, and he remembers that. But that would really be a great loss, wouldn't it? Now imagine you'd been born without a real sense of taste your whole life. How would food be for you? It wouldn't be very enjoyable at all, would it? I mean, if you take away the good taste from food, think about how gross food is. All that chewing and saliva and swallowing things. And, I mean, if it didn't taste so great, I doubt a lot of us would want to do it. There are some people who take less pleasure than they ought to, and Aristotle calls them the insensible. More often, it's a matter of the opposite extreme, though, isn't it? So how are the ways that we go to excess with respect to bodily pleasures? Sometimes we enjoy them too much, right? I'm good evidence of that. I didn't get this physique by exercising, right? How did I get it? Eating more than I should, drinking more than I should, and not exercising as much as I should. So sometimes it could be, a little bit of excess and deficiency. Believe it or not, when I was your age, I weighed like about 180 pounds, and then through most of grad school, I was about 190 because I used to work out 3 hours a day, which was a bit excessive, wasn't it? A lot of us are prone to excesses, and often we replace one excess, we get that under control, we replace it with another, don't we? How many of you think that you might watch too much TV or spend too much time on the internet? Only a few of you? That would be an example of this too, wouldn't it? Why do we do that? Because we enjoy it, right? It's pleasurable. People don't watch TV because it pains them. They watch it because they enjoy it. How many of you can't live without music on at least 4 hours of your day? None of you? There's a lot of people who that's the case. They find themselves unable to work. They find themselves unable to concentrate unless there's music. That may be an example of intemperance or prodigality. Go ahead.
With self-indulgence, it's just interesting.
Self-indulgence, yeah, go ahead.
With self-indulgence, it's interesting because it can sometimes lead up to like a debilitating addiction to it, in which case it turns from pleasantry to something that is actually hurting you.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right. You can become addicted to something and then do it so much that it actually does hurt you. And one thing that sort of constitutes an addiction is, once you become addicted, if you don't get the object of your addiction, you feel a lot of pain, right? And cigarette smoking is a great example of that. I don't know, hopefully none of you smoke cigarettes or use tobacco, because they've been spending a lot of time on making sure that young people don't. But I started smoking when I was 17, and I smoked cigarettes, like about a pack and a half a day, until I was 27, and then I switched to cigars. And I smoked cigars, about 2 or 3 cigars a day, because they pack a lot in nicotine, and they taste really great. Until I was about 33, 34. And the only reason I quit, quite frankly, was because I developed an allergy to nicotine, or to tobacco. And so, and for about a year, I would smoke, big cigar, and then I would get all congested, and I would tell myself, I just got a cold. And it was happening every day. And then I finally realized, I hurt my body a lot because of that. And why did I do it? Well, because I love the feeling of smoking. That's why smokers do it. And if I didn't get it, I felt awful. People get addicted to coffee. They become addicted to alcohol, of course, right? If you drink enough alcohol, your body's going to come to crave it, and you're going to have to have it. We have all sorts of drugs that are, much more powerful than that. What else do people become addicted to when it comes to bodily pleasures? People become addicted to eating. We have various eating disorders, right? How do people develop those? It's through habituation. Nobody just becomes, addicted to this or addicted to that just one time. It requires doing it several times. With some things that are not as naturally addicting, you have to do it over and over and over again. I suppose you could become addicted to music. People become addicted to exercise. If they don't get that exercise, they feel terrible. Not just physically, mentally. People become addicted to sex, right? Leading them into all sorts of risky situations, usually leading to infidelities and things like that. So that's, those are all problem examples. So let's see what we've got for some examples. Okay, so somebody put down as a vice, excess. I think this one, Charlie Sheen. I think you can make a good case that Charlie Sheen has been very self-indulgent in a grand scale. Lots of coke, lots of prostitutes, pretty much doing anything he wants. It's surprising the guy's still alive in some respects. Somebody else has Charlie Sheen down here for the next one. Very good. Temperance, their coach. That's interesting. There is probably something to that. If you want to have a position, being a coach is a tough job. To be a coach, you would actually have to be a good coach, you would actually have to be temperate, I think. Insensibility, pimps. Maybe because they're not indulging themselves as much in their product. Let's see who else we have. For temperance, Barack Obama, who, by the way, is a smoker, right? We all know that. He used to sneak out and smoke cigarettes every once in a while, but he's got it more or less under control. I don't know if he still smokes or not, but that was an issue. Self-indulgent Terrell Owens. Yeah, I think that a lot of celebrities would probably be self-indulgent. Another person's got Charlie Sheen for self-indulgence. That seems to be a big consensus. Here's interesting. These might be a little bit mixed up. The virtue, somebody has Lindsay Lohan down for being temperate. Has she shaped up recently? Does anybody know? She got her life back together? I mean, if Lindsay Lohan actually did get a handle on things and got all of her appetites under control, then she would be temperate. I don't know that that's the case. I haven't followed her story much. I would have placed her over here, right? Based on how she's been over the years. A lot of drinking, a lot of partying, that sort of thing. And then for insensibility, Chris Tucker. Is Chris Tucker, I don't know that much about this. Is he known for not enjoying things much? Or anybody know? Somebody else has Lindsay Lohan over here for self-indulgence. And then Bono for temperance, I suppose. He's lived a rock and roll lifestyle for a long time, but doesn't seem to have screwed him up. And then the Kardashians for insensibility, for not appreciating the pleasures sufficiently. Again, I don't know. Does that ring true for you guys? Kardashians? I don't watch their show, so. Did any of you watch them? Do you think they would fit on the side of not enjoying physical pleasures that much? Some people don't. Do they fit that mold? I don't know. Tell me. What's your take?
I watched the show and I feel like they really like their pleasures.
So if they really like their pleasures, they'd either be temperate or they'd be self-indulgent. What's that?
I'd say excess too much.
Oh, so they're self-indulgent. Okay. I mean, I think most celebrities in our culture probably would be, because they have so much access to pleasures, and pleasures, you know, they draw us in because they're fun and we enjoy it. Let's see. Oh, somebody's got Homer Simpson for self-indulgence. Definitely. I mean, you know, they make whole episodes out of his one vice or another vice. You know, too much donuts, too much beer, too much coffee. Yeah, I think that's a perfect example. Let's look now at another one. Let's look at magnificence. Like I said earlier, if you walk around your college campus, and you walk around any college campus, all the buildings have names. Why do they have names? Who are they named after? Sometimes they're named after like somebody who was an important administrator or something. Who are they named after? Yeah.
People who donated money.
Exactly, people who donated the money, and that's how you get your name on something. Or there's scholarships, you know, it'll be the so-and-so memorial scholarships, usually after they die. So a lot of things on campus exist because people who have money or had money donated it, and that's what makes things like a college work. If your college, I mean, actually right now, given the economy the way it is, you're actually better off if your college is more what we call tuition dependent, based on, you know, the students coming in and taking the money from them, than if it's what we call endowment dependent. The endowment is the money that people have given to the college over the years, and it's been set aside in this big, this big account that's invested, like say, in the stock market. Now the stock market is down, and it's been down for a while, so you know your endowment is smaller. That means you can do less stuff with it, because they use the interest to, you know, say, buy new buildings, or, you know, build that new gate out there, things like that. What about other things? Do people give in our society in other ways? In Greek society, it was like, you know, building a trireme, you know, literally financing part of the Navy, or putting on a choral show, or, you know, putting on a drama, or paying for a religious thing. What do people do in our society? What do they give money for on a large scale? Can you think of any examples?
Cancer.
Yeah, there's people who give for cancer research. I'm thinking where it's like one big donor who's giving money for things. Yeah.
Bill Gates.
Yeah, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? They supposedly, I don't know if this is completely accurate, they gave away 90% of their wealth. Of course, they're still like, you know, multi-billionaires because of that. But they created these gigantic foundations. If you listen to the radio or watch TV, you will see things like the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation. All these foundations were created by rich people. They were ways to give back to the community. If you go around here, most of the local libraries, where did they come from? Andrew Carnegie ended up actually giving the money to build a lot of those libraries. What else do people get? So that's, you know, foundations, scholarships, colleges, anything for our entertainment that people provide? Sometimes people would build stadiums, or, you know, provide a show. Nowadays, you know, how do we build stadiums? We tax everybody. You know, we have to have a stadium for or else the team is going to go away. So we're going to, you know, levy a tax or something like that.
Charge $7 for a hot dog.
Yeah, well, there's that too. They're making some good money there. But a lot of the things that we sort of take for granted, some of them were built by businesses just to make a profit on you. You know, the railroads didn't come in through philanthropy. The railroads came in because people wanted, you know, to get things from here to there, and they were going to charge you money for it. And they were notorious actually for screwing over the farmers out, you know, out of the Midwest. But a lot of things that constitute the world that you live in are the product of somebody's magnificence. Magnificence comes from the Latin word that literally means to do great things. We think of magnificent as like, you know, the thing itself, a magnificent piece of architecture. Well, the real magnificence was somebody giving the money, paying for that to take place. And you can do it in, you know, on a huge scale, you can do it on a smaller scale. But that is the virtue. Then what's the vice? Vulgarity. Some people give, and they don't give to accomplish great things. They don't give, for instance, they might create a new, say, football stadium, but not because the town actually needs it, but because they want to make a big name for themselves, and then they're going to find some way to do it, and they happen to like football, you know. It could even be on a smaller scale. They sponsor the Little League team, but not because they actually care about the development of these kids or see it as a good thing. They just want to get their name out there, right? That's what Aristotle calls vulgarity, or poor taste. That's the excess. What's the deficiency? Not giving. You notice that for Aristotle, there's this idea that if you're wealthy, you ought to be contributing back to society. And it's not because, well, you owe society or something like that, the way a lot of us tend to think about it. You made money off of our backs, you know, that sort of business. It's rather that, hey, if you're a rich person, if you have means, you're a social creature. If you're not actually, of your own free will, wanting to contribute to society, there's something wrong. You have a vicious character. You don't have a virtuous character. Let's look at, okay, so here's some examples that people have. Bill Gates, for magnificence. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I think that would qualify. Did he do it just to make a big name for himself? I don't think so. Stinginess, Scrooge. That's a good one. Scrooge had a lot of money. He didn't give any of it to anybody until he had this, you know, I guess religious conversion, you'd say.